I'm just going to go through one of my PhD studies investigating minimalist footwear in older adults. To start from the beginning, it's well known that falling is a common problem in older age, and this stat highlights quite nicely with 1 in 3 over 65 only one fall per year. This actually rises to 1 in 2 in over 80 as well, so it's really quite a substantial problem. And the risk of falls is due to a combination of different factors. We're getting things from age-related balance and gait impairments, suffering from pain symptoms, for example, from foot problems or osteoarthritis, to cognitive issues, so Alzheimer's and dementia, leading to an increased prevalence of falls, sensory deficits, so decline in sensitivity of cutaneous afferents or proprioceptive systems, also muscle weakness, and also confidence as well. And previous falls have quite a substantial influence on future falls in the future as well. What's also known is how footwear affects a number of these different risk factors, leading to the link between footwear choices and the risk of falls itself. And I investigated one particular type of footwear, which is minimalist footwear, to see how this could have an influence on potentially reducing the risk of falls. I'm sure everybody knows, but for those who don't know, minimalist footwear has been defined as footwear providing minimal interference in the natural motion of the foot. So it tries to allow the foot to function as it would if it wasn't an issue. And this is due to its high flexibility, its low heel to toe drop, so the heel is in the same vertical position as the forefoot, which is not common in a lot of conventional footwear. Its low weight and low stack height, so very thin sole, and also the absence of motion control or stability devices. So effectively, the primary function of this footwear is to provide some protection from the foot, between the floor and the foot sole, but not to try and influence the foot in any way in terms of support or motion control. There's been a lot of research which has shown how walking barefooted is different to walking with shoes. The primary differences being a lower gait velocity, they tend to take shorter steps when they're barefooted. And this also tends to, you walk with a flatter foot contact, so you get reduced ankle dorsiflexion and also increasing flexion. And these also lead to reductions in the torsional moments at the knee and hip joints, for example. There's little research though that has shown how minimalist footwear fits into this equation. But one of my recent studies has shown it's basically an intermediate step. So it's not equivalent to walking barefoot, but it does reduce the differences which are observed when you walk conventional footwear. And these two graphs show that we have stride length on the left and ankle angle at height on the right. And you can see that across all the age groups, minimalist footwear fits into the middle between and control shoes. Now, the risk factor which has been suggested which minimalist footwear could be important for is reducing pain, particularly in patients with osteoarthritis, for example. So this study has looked at the effect of using minimalist shoes for a 6-month period in these patients with knee osteoarthritis to see if potentially you could show reductions in those torsional moments and you see improvements in pain. And you see the intervention group is used triangles here, there's a control group who continue to wear conventional footwear. And you can see significant reductions in pain at the 3-month period and the 6-month period, and also reductions in the use of pain relief medication as well. And this also correlates to an improvement in function as well. So this scale here is the difficulty of performing everyday tasks, and you can see the intervention group have significant reduction in this difficulty, outline an improvement in function. It seems that minimalist shoes could be beneficial at reducing this pain. What's also been suggested is that walking barefooted or in minimalist shoes could be beneficial at increasing activation of lower leg and foot muscles, potentially leading to improvements in muscle size or strength over time. A lot of this research has been done in running performance rather than purely walking, and this is what these studies have shown. You can see significant increases through training in a minimalist shoe compared to a traditional running shoe at the leg and forefoot muscles. There's also been some research though that has shown the similar improvements in walking as well. So this study took 4 different groups, a control group who continued to wear conventional footwear, and they assessed the abductor exercise before and after, and also a 12-week midpoint as well period. There was a restricted walking group, so these incrementally increased the amount that they walked in their shoe, and these saw an increase in abductor exercise at the 24-week period. Similarly, there was a running group who incrementally increased the amount they ran in a minimalist shoe, and likewise these saw an increase at 24 weeks. And also an unlimited walking group who could wear the minimalist shoe as much as they wanted right from the start of the intervention. And these saw an increase at 12-week period. So clearly it could be that even in a walking state, you can potentially increase activation of the lower leg muscles or foot muscles, and potentially seeing increases in muscle size and strength. Now most of this research has been done in young healthy adults, so my research was trying to determine if potentially the same could be witnessed in with older adults, and if this increase in foot strength could lead to improvement in balance over time. By the intervention group, who I provided a pair of Minimalist shoes to wear on a daily basis throughout the 4-month period, and also a control group who continues to wear conventional footwear for the same period of time. Now, I had the intervention group complete a footwear diary to outline how often they wear their shoes throughout the 4-month period, and also both groups had a pedometer to use to outline our purity levels throughout the intervention. These two points were completed at 1 week intervals within each month, so I had 1 week snapshots at each point for each one. So four different intervention periods. I then had 3 and post assessments of foot mobility. So foot mobility magnitude was completed to assess foot posture. The functional reach test to assess their anterior limb stability, so assessment of their dynamic balance. And also a postural space mask, so playing on my force plate and monitor their centre of pressure trajectory, the indicator of their postural display. Oh, and also foot strength. So I completed national voluntary isometric contractions of their big toe to assess their overall foot strength. That's a good indicator of foot strength by how it counteracts the force. The footwear diaries, these show that the intervention group will wear the Minimalist footwear for an average around 7 hours a day. And the pedometer readings show that the intervention group and the control group have relatively high amount of activity levels, illustration of about 8,000 steps a day. They're a relatively active group in both groups. However, after the 4-month period, we saw no significant changes in foot mobility, so the foot mobility magnitude still were consistent in both groups based on control. And also the static balance, we saw no significant changes here, so in terms of sway velocity or total sway path length, there's no significant changes from baseline control of any of the group. We did have to see a slight increase in peak force from baseline control in the intervention group, but not in the control group. And this correlated to significant increase in functional reach performance as well. And this relationship has been seen previously in studies as well. So able to increase their anterior with this increase in foot strength. I also took some qualitative feedback from participants to see how they felt the intervention had gone, so wearing them with shoes. Actually, 12 out of 13 participants in the intervention group felt that they had improvement in balance confidence when wearing them with shoes. And actually 8 of these had felt that their balance had improved itself as a result of wearing these shoes as well. And the reasons they gave for this were practically ground, so they felt they had an improvement in their awareness of surface changes, and also an improved weight distribution. So potentially this could mean that through wearing Minimalist footwear, there's an improvement in the central motor system, which indirectly could have an impact on balance confidence and the performance. Some more direct quotes as well for participants. So aside from the balance and foot strength improvements we potentially were hoping to see as a result of this thing, we actually saw reductions in pain, similar to what we've seen in previous studies. So this one participant stated that she had reduced foot pain from a day of walking, primarily due to less seam pressure as the foot could spread fully. Potentially through a wider fitting shoe, a more flexible fitting shoe, enabled her foot to spread as it should naturally, and this provides a reduction in foot pain in this participant. Similarly, another participant stated she had less hip pain as a result of wearing this footwear, and as a result of increased her walking. And this was supported by the pedometries as well. So she actually had a 15% increase in amount of steps that she completed from the first month to the fourth period. This supports the previous research which has shown reductions in pain at the knee, but also this slightly better here. And finally, the participant said she had 2 toes that didn't work, as she put it, and just to regain some sort of feeling and movement after a month wearing the shoes. Potentially again through a less restrictive footwear, allowing her to function naturally. Potentially has increased the amount that she can feel or move her toes as well. So some quite nice anecdotal evidence supporting potential for reducing pain, the foot and the more proximal joints as well. So in conclusions, when we sort of made a method which improve foot strength in older adults, I've highlighted May in there because obviously my indicator of foot strength is purely hallux punch test before, so not a purely measure of foot strength. And I feel that there's more reason needs to be required to determine this fully, as I did only have 13 participants. Likewise, the data from the participants stated that they had an improvement in balance confidence, so potentially through an improvement in tennis afference, for example. This may have an effect on balance confidence. And evidence also seems to support that minimalist footwear could be beneficial for reducing pain at the hip or at the knee, and potentially also the foot region as well. So I feel that future research on minimalist footwear in this population could be warranted to explore these findings further. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for our interesting talk. So, papers up for questions. Julie,
thank you for a lovely presentation. With your strength test, was that in a seated position or was it more functional? Because we've done similar work and have found that they actually do have more strength in the test that Karen's devised, which is standing upright and actually utilising it. So would you like to comment about the actual strength test, why you use that, and how it could be made more functional to actually test the functional strength of their feet?
Yeah, I think that is one of the limitations of this study. I'm aware of your strength test. We chose to purely do just the hallux punch flexion force, as it's a way of trying to isolate the big toe. As I feel like in this population, it is quite difficult to be able to like a motor control aspect to actually isolate the toes individually. So I feel like trying to purely get it through the hallux punch, the plantar flexion force of the hallux, you could actually benefit from that in those participants. Yeah, I feel like it isn't the most functional task, and I think, yeah, the way that Karen has analysed it could be improved upon from my research.
Mike Osmondson, University of Calgary. I was just wondering why you restricted yourself to foot strength and not look at maybe improvements in ankle strength. That might have something more to do with balance control.
Yeah, good point. I think I was trying to. Previous studies have looked at obviously interventions that are trying to improve overall foot and ankle strength, and I personally just wanted to see if this minimalist footwear could activate the intrinsic muscles to a greater extent, and potentially see improvement in just those. I understand that improving overall the lower leg strength could be more beneficial, but I personally just wanted to see if just the intrinsic muscles could be activated to a greater extent through this footwear.
so we have time for one more. Probably. One more question.
Howard was from HSS. Very interesting. I was wondering if you thought that there was a greater amount of proprioception, which might explain the confidence.
Yeah, so that is the primary reason, I think. With that thin flexible sole, you can get a lot of information from the lower extremity. And that's why we include this some sort of static balance task as well, to see if potentially there could be improvements in that as a result. But definitely there's a proprioception impact through levels as well.
Joe, you have another question.
I'm interested in your center of pressure, and you used an ellipse. Okay, so how did you evaluate that the data in the ellipse? Did you assume that it was higher or better balanced if you were within the ellipse, or more of the path was in the ellipse, or what?
So we did a whole range of different analysis on that, so including velocity, amplitude, but then also did the total toe path length, affecting the whole line, and sway area. So we assumed that a smaller sway area, for example, within that ellipse would suggest improved balance. So that smaller sway path would be better.
Yeah, you might want to read maybe by Richard Benham in Exercise Sports Science Reviews, the way you evaluated that ellipse. Thanks.
Just finally, a question. You pointed out that these minimalistic shoes are related to a low heel and high flexibility. Which factor is more important for yourself?
I would say, based on the participant feedback, I think they found that potentially being put into a natural position with the heel at the same height as the foot helped with that weight distribution. I feel like, I think research needs to be done to what exactly the factor in. You change a lot from the to the work, identify what specific aspects could be interesting.
Thank you very much. So we get to move on. We are presenting the next paper.
Next presentation will be with Kathleen Mills from Macquarie University. She's going to present her work titled "Is Immediate Comfort While Running in Cushion versus Minimal Footwear Related to Plantar Prosthetic Activity?" Please welcome Kathleen.
Before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge my co-authors on this project, as well as acknowledging that the footwear for the study was supplied by New Balance Global Scientific Group. So similar to the palm of the hand, the plantar surface of the foot is a densely populated somatosensory area. We have cutaneous mechanoreceptors and nociceptors that provide information from our only point of contact with the ground during gait to the central nervous system. Now this is important and unique feed-forward information about the displacement of the centre of mass, and it's used for things in single leg stance, as well as accurate foot placement, and even helping decelerating the forward momentum of the centre of mass during gait. Now we can alter the threshold that transduces and transmits signals from the sensory receptors in the periphery to the central nervous system pretty easily. And when we do that, there are immediate changes in gait parameters. So that's really good evidence that there's an afferent feedback loop at play. Now, interestingly, the changes observed when we alter these thresholds are very similar to the immediate gait changes that are observed when we ask people to move in shoes that they find uncomfortable. And it's also similar to one study which has demonstrated very similar changes to what has been observed when they ask people to run in minimal shoes for the first time. So what we have from the literature are 3 different experimental conditions that have very similar immediate effects on gait parameters. But what we don't know is how these experimental conditions interrelate. So to explore if and how plantar foot sensitivity is related to footwear comfort in runners, we recruited a fair amount of runners. So they're all in the middle 30s. They were reasonably experienced runners, having run at least twice a week for 8 years and averaging around about 30 kilometres a week. Now an important experimental design feature here is that they were all healthy, so there was no reason that their plantar surface of their foot sensory profile would be pathologically altered. And they're all novices to minimal shoes. They've never run in them before. Interestingly, really fortuitous for us, most of them have never run in a cushion shoe before either. So we got a novice to both conditions. Excellent. All right. So this was a baseline session of a longitudinal study, and it started with the mechanical battery of a quantitative sensory testing standardized protocol, and that's previously been described by Rob. Now, quantitative sensory testing evaluates the entire neural axis, so from the signal generator in the periphery right through to the cortex. And while we kept the order of the tests standard for all participants, and that's as per the protocol, we tested the sensory profile of 4 areas of the foot. So the heel, the medial and lateral midfoot, and the medial forefoot. Now, two of these tests, that's the first and the third test, focus on mechanoreception. So the first uses a series of weighted little monofilaments, they look like fishing lines, and that's used to detect the lightest touch that someone can feel. The third tests use a vibrating 64 Hz tuning fork, and it measures the time that someone feels the vibration for, so it's vibration decay. The second and the fourth tests focus on nociception, and these are receptors that give us that uncomfortable experience as well as the pain experience. So the first test, it uses weighted pinpricks and examines the point at which the participant first reports a sensation of sharp as opposed to blunt. And the last test that we did uses a pressure algometer, and that's applied to the sole of the foot with increasing force. And it measures the point at which the pressure is no longer just pressure, but is actually painful. So it's the very first onset of pain. Having established these thresholds, we then got participants to go for a couple of runs. So we took them outside and we put together a 900-metre track that we thought was fairly representative of a typical Sydney-style track. There was some bush, there was some cement, there was lots of traffic, so they had to stand and run on the spot for a little while. We kept them at a constant speed, and we did that with some time checks throughout the run. And they ran in two different shoes. So the first shoe was a New Balance 1080, it's a very cushioned shoe. And the second was actually two shoes. So the majority of our participants ran in a zero drop minimal shoe, but just towards the end of our study, New Balance stopped producing that, so we switched to a 4mm drop. Now the order of these shoes were randomised for each participant, and at the end of those runs, we asked participants to rank the shoes in order of comfort. So tell us which one they found more comfortable, and this is an overall comfort measure. 47 of those participants told us that they preferred the cushioned shoe. Now these participants ran significantly less kilometres per week, but besides that, they were very equally distributed in terms of the proportion of males to females in each group, as well as the proportion of people who preferred the 0 or 4mm drop compared with cushioned shoes. So we felt quite comfortable combining those two shoe together. In terms of their sensory profile, what I'm going to show you now is a series of graphs which demonstrate the mean difference and 95% confidence interval between the cushioned shoe preferers and the minimal shoe preferers. On this graph, I'm going to show you two thresholds. So on the left axis, I'm going to show you the mechanical detection threshold, and I'm using the red horizontal line there to illustrate the point of equivalence between the two conditions. And on the secondary axis, which is on the right, I'm showing you the mechanical pain threshold, and I'm using the grey line here to demonstrate the point of equivalence. The red point estimates of effect are the mechanical detection, and the grey point estimates of their effect are of mechanical pain. Positive integers are that the thresholds were higher in the cushioned shoes, and negative integers are that they are higher in the minimal shoes. So what we saw from our participants is that those individuals who preferred the minimal shoes had significantly higher mechanical pain thresholds, both at the lateral midfoot and the heel, compared with those who preferred the cushioned shoes. Now, interestingly, there was a very close to significance. There was a trend towards people who preferred the cushioned shoes having high mechanical detection thresholds. So at the heel, they may have actually felt less in terms of general sensation. These two graphs demonstrate on the left, on the right side, you have the vibration sensitivity, and on the left, you have the pressure pain sensitivity. We can see there was no difference in the pressure pain sensitivity between our participants. But in terms of vibration, participants who prefer the minimal shoes exhibited significantly higher vibration thresholds. They felt vibration for longer at their medial forefoot as well as their lateral midfoot. So to put this into a little bit more context and show some of the relative importance or comparability of these thresholds, I'm going to use the standardised mean difference, and that's over here on this right axis. I'm going to cross the medial forefoot to the heel with standardised, and the standardised mean difference is essentially a ratio of the difference divided by variation. So it takes out the units, so we get a bit of an idea of how these differences in threshold compare to each other. And what we saw is that in terms of the vibration sensitivity and mechanical pain at the heel, the size of the effects were pretty similar and comparable, and they were sitting in that moderate threshold. But the difference in the mechanical pain detection at the lateral midfoot was actually quite large, so it suggests that this is possibly quite an important change. So to summarise all of this into a nice little package, people who find cushion running shoes immediately more comfortable appear to be significantly and importantly less sensitive or more sensitive to pain at their lateral midfoot and moderately so at their heel, and less sensitive to vibration at their medial forefoot and lateral midfoot. Now we think that this latter point in particular may suggest that these individuals need help actually attenuating vibration because potentially they're not able to perform a muscle tuning response as well as their minimal shoe preferring counterparts. So we're starting to think that the perception of comfort, particularly when it comes to footwear, is actually part of a protective adaptive strategy. So it's a helpful warning signal, for lack of a better word, whereby the perception of comfort as it pertains to shoes is associated with running shoes that stimulate the mechanoreceptors to a point where it supports the preferred movement path and that it doesn't actually change gait speed, but also potentially offers some vibration dampening effects and may assist the muscle tuning response. Importantly, however, that comfort is then also associated with shoes that provide minimal activation to nociceptors and thus help the runner avoid a potentially painful experience. So thank you very much for your attention.
I know there's a lot of studies that are done with immediate effect. Do you think it would be useful, a lot of runners would give themselves a bit of time to settle into a shoe, like to go back in 2 weeks or a month later and do it again? Or?
So we actually followed these people for 6 to 8 months and we asked them to change through footwear. So what we were interested in is the people that found the same footwear comfortable all the way along and what happened with their sensory profiles. And we've also got the individuals who changed their footwear preference. And we actually got the individuals to step right under their foot. So we have people that were, and what we were interested in is whether or not the nervous system actually has to adapt and how quickly those adaptations happen for those transitions to be what we consider to be successful. So people were able to change and not change gait speed and have minimal other mechanical parameters involved here as well. So yes, we're very interested to see whether that changes over time.
Carl Jewell, University of Massachusetts Amherst. Great talk. I just had a question about some of the history of the participants, training status, body size, and their normal preference for footwear. Were any of these different between who chose the minimalist or cushion shoe?
No, so in terms of our body size, there was absolutely no difference in BMI, and weight didn't change and heights didn't change, which means so they all looked very similar. And a lot of these participants, Sydney's actually a pretty small town, so they all end up in running clubs and have deals with certain companies. So a lot of them actually came to us in very similar shoes, and they were all sort of that neutral, nothing super special about them, but good for them shoes. So in terms, they were all, I think, very comfortable across that board. And all of them were regular replacements of footwear. So no one came into us wearing shoes that they had for 3 years. They were all bought within the last 6 months.
Benedict, University of Calgary. What frequency, amplitudes, and frequency values did you use for your testing?
In terms of?
You tested the frequencies, didn't you?
No, so we used for the vibration sensitivity, that's a standard 64 Hertz tuning fork, and it's not a measure of the frequency of the vibration because that's set, it measures the time of the decay. So it's actually a measurement in seconds that the vibration is felt through the foot. The other units of measure are millinewtons, and that's used for mechanical detection and mechanical pain. And then for pressure pain, it's kilograms of force.
And how does that relate to protection?
Well, in terms of in terms of protection, the lighter the touch that someone perceives as painful, in back pain research and in condition pain modulation, indicates that there's a faster withdrawal reflex, really, for lack of a better word. So it's used as a way of stimulating the nociceptors far earlier in that pressure cycle. And that's in the literature is seen as a way of actually protecting that nervous system from activation of the nociceptors. So the mechanoreceptors become exhausted very, very quickly, and that pulls into nociception, and you've got the protective influence of the pain experience that kicks in there. Does that answer your question? Yep.
Okay, then the next paper comes from the University of Brussels, and Veronique Weipel will present this paper, which is related to minimalistic running, and especially deals with a specific running technique in the novel study. Now this is here again.
I'm very happy to present the study of two of my co-workers, Nathalie Zeman and Karen. Running is one of the most frequently realized, one of the most common sport activities. It is very accessible to the general public, and thus in the recreational activity it is very common. However, the risk of injury is of course one of the major issues, despite long years of research in the field of footwear and improving these aspects of injury prevention. In recent years there has been a lot of research on minimalistic shoewear and minimalistic running. It is said to have the potential to reduce the risk of injury. It is also said to be more natural. So the approach that we have chosen here in our work is finally to combine something that we could call a minimalistic running technique with conventional shoes, and we were interested in seeing if we could apply this approach in novice runners. The idea would be, on the long term, to promote the inclusion of specific running technique exercises in jogging training programs. So the purpose of this study was to see if it was possible to teach the technique of minimalist running with standard shoes to novices in running, and if this approach was able to reduce the risk of pain in the knee, shin, metatarsals, and Achilles tendon. To do so, we designed a study with 12 weeks of training using personal running shoes. In the first group, the subject had one specific training of running technique and one jogging a week. And in the control group, subject ran twice a week without specific instructions. We had 53 novice runners in the minimalistic group and 43 in the control group. And this is an ongoing study. So the technical training consists of specifically of drills, so running technique trainers with specific types of exercises We also used ladder runs for frequency, for instance, stair running, uphill running. We also included some of that prevention exercises such as stretching and eccentric exercises. Subjects are tested at 3 moments, T1 at baseline, following the 12-week program, and they will be tested at T3 1 year later, so this will start in autumn. At each of these testing instances, they were asked to run 3 times over a gauge rail or Zeno instrumented walkway. We used the PKMS software to extract space and temporal gauge parameters, center of pressure parameters, and the relative pressure data. They also completed a diary with they were asked to report pain and injuries that they suffered each month, and they also were asked to have a diary of what they trained. We used non-parametric statistics to compare groups and time points. So let's first answer the question about the risk of injury, or the occurrence, the incidence of injuries. We found after 3 months a significantly less calf pain in both groups, and especially in the minimalist group, despite a slight but non-significant increase of Achilles pain. There was also a reduction in tibialis anterior and quadriceps pain. A significant reduction of knee pain was also found in this group. You can see in the control group, knee pain was quite elevated, between 10 and 50%. It was very low and even decreased significantly in the minimalist group at the end. Also, shin splints was had a lower frequency in the minimalist group. Note that none of the participants reported metatarsal pain, which is one of the injuries that is frequently reported as a risk in minimalist running. What about technique? So, the minimalist technique is characterized in different ways concerning cadence and step length. Some studies report an increase of cadence and a decrease of step length. However, we didn't find a significant effect. We found concerning the special temporal parameters, however, a decrease in step width in the minimalist. We also found significant changes in the center of pressure. The anterior-posterior excursion of the center of pressure was significantly reduced in the minimalist group, mainly compensated by a slight increase in the mediolateral excursion. The velocity of the center of pressure also significantly decreased in the minimalist group. The length of the foot contact on the ground was also significantly decreased, and if we looked at the strike type, we found that about approximately 60% in the minimalist group changed from rear foot to mid or forefoot strike. So the spatial temporal parameters and center of pressure parameters that we found to vary showed that we had a transition in a percentage of study of our participants in the minimalist group to a midfoot or forefoot strike pattern. The decrease in the center of pressure velocity could be the indication maybe of a better control of the dorsiflexion, the ankle dorsiflexion that has to occur with an eccentric contraction of the foot. It may also be a mechanism of better energy storage in the Achilles. We also showed that our approach was able to reduce the amount of injuries at the calf, knee, and shin. So we can conclude that it is possible to apply the minimalist technique with standard running shoes in novice runners, and that it reduces the risk of injuries. So So it could be interesting to promote the inclusion of specific technical exercises in jogging programs for beginners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for time for questions. Please address the questions.
What was your definition of shin splint injury? Is it an umbrella term of all pain at the shin? Or
Excuse me?
what was your definition of shin splint injury?
So, in the group of investigators, there were 2 physical therapists. So they were available to examine participants if they had some pain for which they wanted to have medical advice. So it was pain at the level of the periosteal region of the tibia that was reported. So it was not probably it was not verified by any examination.
Here's one more question.
Yeah, just a comment. I think that that's really important work. A lot of people early in the process. I just want to say it's very important work because a lot of runners in the early days when minimalistic shoes were first introduced would come to their physician with all kinds of complaints and pathology. And I guess my question would be, how do you recommend getting this program or this information to the new runner who goes to the store and buys the shoe?
This is a very good question because most novice runners just go to the shop, buy shoes, and begin running without a lot of advice. In this study, we recruited the subjects in jogging clubs, so where they have start-to-run programs for novice runners of all ages. And there is a possibility to have the accompanies, not really coaches, but let's say the accompanies or coaches include such exercises in the program. I think for the rest, for those that just start and run, which is great, of course, but may also be one of the causes of the important proportion of subjects that undergo injuries in running. Well, there might be possibilities to work with shoe companies and resellers to try to have to include this in the type of advice that they could give to novice runners.
Yeah, the only reason I asked the question is we've heard a number of times at the hospital. I used to run 5 miles every day. I put on my minimalist shoes and I ran 5 miles the first day, and I'm in agony. And it's because of the lack of education. That's what
Probably because of the lack of education. The other aspect which has been shown in the literature, I think, quite clearly is the transition period, which in my eyes probably 12 weeks is even not long enough. So you have had several studies, I think Madeleine, who had his presentation yesterday, did a study where they also progressively transited from rear foot to midfoot or forefoot strike on, I think, the same duration as we did. But still, I think that is not long enough. And I think that the inclusion of this type of exercises that will strengthen the muscles that we need to have a proper approach on the mid-foot forefoot.
You stated that minimalistic running or minimalistic shoe running is more natural. What do you mean with natural running?
I think that I said that it is said to be more natural.
Okay, great comment. You have more questions? Joe, I think Stefan was first.
Very good. I might have missed this, but the training program that you used, was that devised by you and your team?
Yes, so it was devised by our team where we have one master in sports sciences, one athletic coach, and two physical therapists. So we designed it in the
Thank you. I think that is a very interesting study. But still, I'm wondering about the training volume, because I think the experimental group did one running session and one drill session. Was that of the same volume, duration, or intensity as the second running session? Or could that have influenced the results?
Thank you for this comment. That was, of course, the first comment that the athletic coach and the sports scientist told us, so we must be sure that the effective training volume and time are similar in both groups, so this was also a controlled test.
Okay. The last question for this.
Minimalist running technique tends to be considered to be for midfoot striking as well as the increased cadence and reduced stride length. You've really only changed one factor. So I just wonder if if you've really moved to a minimalist technique or just moved to a midfoot strike technique, which maybe it's just the drills that really made the difference rather than the technique.
Yes. So my answer would be yes. So there are other factors that I didn't show here so much, but we also measured the angles of the knee and the ankle joint at foot contact. There were also changes towards a more flexed knee and the more plantar flexed ankle. I didn't show that here, which are also said to be part of the minimalist approach. Our study is not the only one that didn't show changes in cadence and step lengths. The study of Willis and Davis didn't show any changes in these parameters either. My first idea was to say that for novice runners, you have with training an increase in step length, a natural increase in step length, which may have compensated the smaller step length that you would induce by minimalist running.
Thank you very much. We move on to the next paper, and this is from the University of Calgary. Karen Felminger will speak about the effect of minimalistic footwear on metatarsal fracture.
Thanks for the introduction. So let's begin with the definition of what a stress fracture actually is. Stress fracture is a bone fracture that's associated with mechanical fatigue. So this occurs when we have repetitive loading that's below the acute fracture threshold of a bone. So this doesn't happen when we have one overloading cycle that just fractures the bone outright. It actually happens when we have many repetitive loading cycles that are at a much lower magnitude. And what actually occurs in the bone is that we have this micro damage accumulating. And if the bone isn't able to repair that micro damage, it continues and continues to accumulate, and then we get a stress fracture. And what it actually looks like in the bone is a micro crack, which is shown on the right-hand side of the screen here. So the fatigue behavior of bone has been well defined in the literature, and it looks something like this. So on the y-axis of this plot, we have the strain that the bone is experiencing, and on the x-axis of this plot, we have the number of cycles that bone will take until it fits. And what we can take from this graph is that very small changes in the magnitude of strain of the bone will result in very large changes in the number of cycles that bone will take until failure, because the x-axis of this graph is actually logarithmic. So in our research, that means that any small change that we can make in the strain of the bone will actually lead to large changes in the number of cycles until that bone fails. So we know that the majority of stress fractures occur in track athletes and long distance runners. And this kind of makes sense because these athletes are placing a lot of repetitive loading cycles on their lower limbs. One of the most frequent locations of stress fractures in the metatarsal bones, shown in red here. And furthermore, we know that running in minimalist shoes causes an increased forefoot load, so it might be loading these bones more. We also know that metatarsal stress fractures have been observed in minimalist shoe users. So with this in mind, we looked at potential methods to alter metatarsal strength. The first of which was with shoe type. So we looked at minimalist versus traditional shoes. The second method was through stride length. So we looked at preferred stride length and the reduced stride length, which we took to be 90% of the subject's preferred stride length. The purpose of our study was to quantify the effect that footwear and stride length had on the probability of metatarsal stress fracture during running. We hypothesized that running in minimalist footwear would increase the probability of metatarsal stress fracture due to increased loads placed on these bones, while running at a reduced stride length would decrease the probability of metatarsal stress fracture due to decreased loads on these bones, even though there was an increased number of cycles needed to run a certain distance. So we took a New Balance 890 V5 as our traditional shoe. This shoe had a minimalist index of 48%. For those people who aren't familiar with the minimalist index, it's basically a measure that's been devised to show how much of a minimalist shoe any given shoe is. So a shoe with a 0% minimalist index would have a lot of cushioning, a very high heel-toe drop, limited flexibility, and a lot of stability mechanisms, while a shoe that's 100% in the minimalist index would essentially have no cushioning, no heel-toe drop, and very, very few stabilization mechanisms, if any. So with this in mind, our minimalist shoe is the New Balance Minimus 0 V2. It had a much higher minimalist index of 86%. So what we had was 14 subjects come into our lab. These subjects were all male recreational runners who'd never run in minimalist footwear before and who all exhibited a heel strength pattern. The first testing session that we did was to capture kinematic and kinetic data of these subjects as they ran in both shoes and at both stride lengths. And we did this by placing 7 retroreflective markers on the ankle and the shoe. This was done to divide the shoe into a heel, or a high foot portion and a forefoot portion, separated by the metatarsal phalangeal joint. We captured kinetics by putting a pressure-sensitive insole inside the shoe. And in a second data collection session, we captured a CT scan of the subjects while they wore both the minimalist and the traditional shoe. This was done for 2 reasons. The first of which was to develop a 3D model of each of the metatarsals for use in the finite element model later. And the second reason was to capture the neutral angle of each metatarsal bone inside both the minimalist and the traditional shoe. So with this information, we used a musculoskeletal model developed by Stokes et al. This model is of the metatarsal phalangeal joint. So briefly, it's modeling metatarsal and the phalange as 2 rigid segments. If we know the force acting on the toe, Ft, and if we know the angle of the metatarsals at, alpha, we can estimate the force that's under the plantar musculature, which is represented by PL and PS, which crosses under the metatarsal phalangeal joint. And with this information, we can calculate Fmat, which essentially is the force that's acting on the metatarsal head from both the ground and also from the joint reaction forces. With this force, we can take that 3D model from our CT scan and use a finite element model to calculate the actual strain distribution on a subject-specific metatarsal. We can take this one step further and calculate the probability of failure with including repair with something called the Weibull analysis. So Weibull analysis is essentially just a probability distribution function. It's been used for a variety of outputs, including estimating the life of an electric light bulb, all the way to estimating life expectancy of humans. So it's really ideal for our situation because it accounts for several things that we're interested in. The first of which is the volume of bone. So we can see here that between the first metatarsal and the 5th metatarsal, the volume varies greatly, so we wanted to take that into account in our analysis, as well as the strain distribution across the bone. So out of our finite element model, we have this great picture here with a lot of different strains that are across the bone, and we want to encapsulate all those strains, and we're looking at what happens in terms of the probability of failure. The third thing it takes into account is the scattering experimental data. So this is the same graph that I showed earlier, now with the experimental data overlaid on it. So each one of these red dots here represents an actual bone sample in a test, a fatigue test. So you can see that for any given strain, there's a lot of different scatter in the amount of cycles that any given bone can last, and that's represented well with this Weibull analysis. Finally, it takes into account the number of loading cycles, which is a function of both running distance and as well as stride length. So stride length was taken into account from our first data collection session, and the running distance was assumed to be 20 kilometers per week for all of our subjects for the purpose of this analysis. So what we get out of this from the viable analysis is a cumulative failure probability over time. If we assume that the bone is an inert material with no ability to repair itself, we get a curve that looks something like this, where the cumulative failure probability just continues to increase over time until it hits 100% failure. If we add in a term that accounts for the repair of the bone, so the bone's inherent ability to repair damage within it, we get a curve that looks like the black line. So it kind of increases and then finds this equilibrium value where we have amount of repair that's equivalent to the accumulation of micro damage in the bone. So the first thing we're going to look at now is the strains that we found out of our finite element model. So on the y-axis we have the von Mises equivalent median strain, and on the x-axis we have the percent of stance from 30% to 80%. This is for one representative subject for their second metatarsal bone. So the red lines you can see are for the minimalist shoe, the black lines are for the traditional shoe, and the dotted lines in either color represent running at the reduced stride length. So what we can immediately see is that there is a significant effect of footwear on strain, with minimalist shoes exhibiting significantly higher strains in the second metatarsal. This becomes even more obvious when we look at the actual strain distribution from the finite element model. We can see that there's much greater strains on the dorsal surface of the metatarsal in the minimalist shoe compared to the dorsal surface of the metatarsal in the traditional shoe. And this increase in strain in minimalist footwear held true for all 5 metatarsal bones. So next we'll look at the actual output of our viable model and the probability of failure with repair. So each one of these plots represents one of the 5 metatarsals. The y-axis of all the plots is the probability of failure with repair as a percentage, and on the x-axis we have the traditional shoe and the minimalist shoe. The gray lines represent the individual subjects, and the dark black line represents the Greek mean change. So we can see that for all 5 metatarsals, the probability of failure in the minimalist footwear increased. However, this increase was significant only for the first, second, and fourth metatarsals. If we move on to look at the effect of stride length, for the same plots here, except the x-axis is now preferred stride length versus 90% of preferred stride length, we see a different relationship. So no significant change is observed for any of the 5 metatarsals when running at reduced stride length compared to the preferred stride length. So we wanted to take this one step further and look at what is exactly causing this change in between shoe conditions. So we looked at the 2 inputs into our finite element model, namely the metatarsal angle and the force acting on the metatarsal head. So when we looked at the metatarsal angle between the 2 shoe conditions, we noticed that it was actually 5.6 degrees lower on average in the minimalist shoe than the traditional shoe. And this kind of makes sense because if the metatarsal angle is at a lower angle, or if the metatarsal is at a lower angle, the force that's applied to it is going to cause a bigger bending load, which will increase the strains that we see in that bone. Whereas in the traditional shoe, if it's at a higher angle, more of that force will be transmitted along the axial component of the bone, causing less strain. When we looked at the force, we saw something kind of unexpected. We saw that the force did not change significantly between minimalist and the traditional shoe conditions. So this leads us to believe that a lot of this difference in probability of failure is actually caused by the alignment of the metatarsal within the shoe and not by an actual increase in force in the minimalist shoe compared to the traditional shoe. So to conclude, we found that the probability of stress fracture was 8.6 times greater when running in minimalist footwear compared to the traditional footwear. And we also saw that a stride length reduction is probably not an effective strategy of reducing metatarsal stress fracture risk. However, it's not a detriment either. So it's still something that is potentially beneficial for some people, but we found that it didn't really change the probability of failure. So with that, I'd like to thank my funding sources and my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, very interesting stuff. So first question, Chef.
Thank you for the very interesting and I think also very nice approach in analyzing that. I was just wondering if your statistical model is not only including repair, but might also include adaptation of the strength of the bones, because I think that is happening in biomaterials.
Yeah, and that's another step you can take with the model analysis. We didn't take that for the purpose of this study. It's just adding an extra term into that analysis, and really all it would do is what we've seen from other studies doing that, it just kind of systematically will lower all of the probabilities of failure to a more epidemiological level. So I don't think it would actually change the results we see. It would just kind of lower those probabilities of failure down to a little bit more.
Then your results are relevant for an immediate change to minimalist footwear.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we're modeling too, like an acute change from a traditional to a minimalist shoe. Yeah.
We'll come on, please.
Hi, Oliver Morgan, Russell University. I was just wondering whether you performed the validation of the model. So in terms of developing it and also creating the CT, whether you were able to verify the meshing.
Yeah, actually we did. One of my colleagues actually performed a final element model validation as a part of her master's thesis. So she took the metatarsals from cadavers and loaded them in a mechanical testing machine, and we compared the strains from that to the strains that we found in our finite element model. We actually found a very, very good relationship between the two of them, a score of 0.98 and a slope that was almost 1. So we were pretty confident that we were getting good strains, or relevant strains out of our finite element model.
Hi. Really wonderful presentation, and I was interested in a little more details about the model. You may have just simplified it for purposes of illustration, but I didn't see forces under, say, the hallux or the digits or plantar fascia or other anatomical structures. And I guess my question is it a static model, static equilibrium, or is it a dynamic model? And what forces are really involved? Because it could affect conclusions.
So you're talking about the musculoskeletal model? Yeah, so it's a static model that takes force under the toes as well as the force under the metatarsal heads. So we actually segmented the pressure sensing insole into different regions, one for each toe and one for each metatarsal head, based on a previous study. And that's what we used to put into the model, as well as that metatarsal angle. And then the model actually just estimates, when you calculate basically the force acting on the plantar fascia. So it only takes forces from the forefoot, but it uses an estimated plantar fascia force based on some moments around the metatarsal phalangeal joint to actually calculate the joint contact force on the metatarsal head.
Yes, I see that boundary condition is essentially a fixed condition, right? And so I think it's not unusual to have a very high R-squared value here. So I wonder what are the footwear parameters that you're putting into the model to determine the footwear, because in reality it's not exactly a cantilever beam.
Right, yeah, there definitely is some movement between the metatarsal and the tarsal behind it. The way we're thinking about it is that this movement would actually probably amplify what we're seeing here. With the traditional shoe having the arch support, we'd actually probably keep the metatarsal up more aligned with the tarsal behind it. However, with this minimalist footwear being more flexible, it would probably allow for more movement and actually maybe even flatten out that metatarsal more in the minimalist shoe compared to what we're estimating it to be. So we believe we have a conservative measurement, but it is a limitation that we're not taking into account the movement that's there.
Julie, the final question.
Thank you for a lovely presentation. My teaching voice. I'm just interested with the reduction in stride length. Is it possible that some people already had a short stride length, but the shortened it wasn't going to help? And did it have to be more individual than just saying, look, we're going to take everyone, we're all going to do it by 90%?
It could be the case. I'm assuming that because everyone was a rear foot runner, that they were probably just running with their normal stride length and not trying to run with their reduced stride length. But yeah, potentially that maybe even a greater reduction in stride length would be necessary, or further investigation as to who would actually need to receive a stride length reduction.
Yes. Some rear foot strikers can have really tiny stride lengths, but not everyone who hits the heel has a long stride or short stride.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for thank you very much for the questions. We are in time. So announcements we have?
Hey, just catching up. Just a couple of quick announcements for those who have posters. The poster session is rather quick fire, and given the issues we have with getting our presentations up, could you get them uploaded as quickly as possible so we can make sure the system works? I've got the technician coming back at lunchtime, and he's going to stay here the rest of the day, so the people who are in the afternoon session, hopefully it'll work a little bit better than that. Ned, the editorial board meeting is this afternoon, lunchtime, isn't it? Ned, you awake? 12:30, the Paradise Room 3 down here on the right-hand side. Reminder that the student meeting this evening, the get-together at the Clock Hotel, which is out in the lead, probably all found it by now anyway, 7 p.m. And those who are wanting to have dinner here in the hotel tonight, it's a free evening. Tonight's a international buffet and it's quite popular. So if you're intending to have dinner here at the hotel, please make a booking, it'll be to your advance. Other than that, morning coffee's out there available, and thanks for your attention this morning.
I